looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
All right, my friends, next I'm going to introduce Mr. John Cartwright. John Cartwright is the president of the Toronto York Region Labour Council, representing 205,000 union members in Canada's largest urban centre. John has been committed to not just social justice, but also environmental justice. Let's all welcome Mr. John Cartwright. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. I want to talk a little bit about this city of Toronto, which, as we know, got its name from our First Nations that lived here for millennia before, and today boasts about being a city where we've come from 192 countries and speak over 100 languages. And I want to talk about two individuals, Bromley Armstrong, who is a Jamaican-Canadian auto worker, and Colin Kaplansky, who was a Jewish-Canadian trade unionist in 1947. After seeing the horrors of the Holocaust, after seeing the horrors of a war where millions were killed because of racism and white supremacy, helped to create something called the Toronto Joint Labour Committee on Human Rights Against Racial Discrimination. And that organization went consciously into restaurants to challenge discrimination, into apartment buildings to challenge racism, into workplaces to challenge racism, and forced the Ontario government to pass the first ever human rights legislation in Canada. They started a long journey that Labour, whether or not we were black, white, brown, yellow, red, came together to demand a kind of Canada that we talk about, you know, in the songs, but it's not the reality of so many of our sisters and brothers. And in the 1940s and 50s, as they challenged that systemic discrimination, other allies stepped forward. But we also had a side to our society that people didn't talk about. We had a group called the Western Guard. Anybody here ever heard of the Western Guard? In the 1970s, that white supremacist group firebombed the Jamaican club to say to immigrants of the Caribbean that somehow this is not a place for them. But so many others rose up and said, you're wrong. This is a place where everybody can come. In the 1980s, they called themselves a Heritage Front. And they invited the Ku Klux Klan to come to Toronto. And I see some people in the crowd today that were out on the streets in 1982 physically saying to the Klan, you don't belong here, get the hell out of this city, and we threw them out of this city. And the liberal media, many others said, no, you have to have an honest conversation. You have to allow freedom of speech. And we said, there's no goddamn way racists will have a freedom of speech in this town. We're going to shut them down. And when we forced them out of the city, you know, those guys put their heads under rocks for a long time. They were afraid to come out. But with Donald Trump, with Stephen Harper, giving permission to Islamophobia, you know, one of our allies said that Islamophobia is actually the cauldron where these white supremacists were gathering support in these last number of years. And that's why our labor movement a number of years ago named Islamophobia as a very particular thing that we have to challenge. Particularly people that look like me. Particularly people whose families came from Europe or England elsewhere, and said we've got to stand up and challenge people who are our neighbors and our family members around anti-Muslim hate, around anti-black racism, and now around systemic racism. And we have to go to every institution in this city and in this province of this country and piece by piece tackle systemic racism and make sure that every institution, the schools where our kids go to, the workplaces we work, the police forces who are supposed to serve and protect, and this place here should have a sign just like the City Hall in Barcelona does. Refugees welcome. That's what we're supposed to be about, all of us together. Thank you, sisters and brothers. Thank you.